The courthouse in the heart of Fairview hadn't seen this much attention in years. The hallways were packed. Journalists, true crime podcasters, and curious locals stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering about the case that had gripped the town for weeks. At the center of it all sat Emily Sanders, a 28-year-old single mother, her hands clenched so tightly on her lap that her knuckles had turned white. Her lawyer, Daniel Reyes, leaned in and whispered something to her, but she didn't react. She just stared straight ahead, as if staring into the void. She was barely recognizable from the photos that had once shown her smiling beside her son in a park. Today, all the light had drained from her. The judge entered, and the room fell into a heavy silence. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. This was the preliminary hearing. The prosecution was expected to argue that Emily's carelessness had endangered the life of her 3-year-old son, Noah. If it went to trial and she lost, she could lose custody, maybe forever. 2 weeks earlier, Noah had been found alone in the middle of the night by a K9 police unit. The official report stated that he had wandered away from home through a back door that was left open. Officer Tate, the K9 handler, claimed his dog Baxter tracked the toddler's scent from the backyard to the roadside, where the boy was discovered sitting near a light pole. It had been raining heavily, but when they found Noah, his socks were clean, his pajamas were dry, and he wasn't crying, he was just sitting. The town, fueled by gossip and tabloids, had turned against Emily almost immediately. She probably left the door open. Or was drunk or high, one woman had muttered outside the courthouse the morning of the hearing. Daniel had heard it all before. He had taken Emily's case pro bono. Something about her eyes told him she wasn't guilty. And something about... The police report told him someone was lying. The first witness to take the stand was Officer Tate. He walked up confidently, his uniform pressed, his large K9 Baxter sitting obediently at his side. The courtroom watched intently as Tate described how the dog had picked up Noah's scent and led them right to him. His voice was flat, practiced, too perfect. "Did the dog hesitate at any point during the tracking?" Daniel asked during cross-examination. "No." "Sir," Tate replied without blinking. "He led us straight there." Daniel jotted something down but said nothing more. He had reviewed the route. He'd seen the mud. And he couldn't forget how Noah's clothes looked untouched. There was no way a 3-year-old walked that path alone during a storm and arrived clean. Behind the glass partition in the gallery sat Emily's ex, Jeremy. She saw him as soon as she walked into court, though she hadn't seen him in nearly a year. Her breath had caught in her throat. He sat smugly, arms folded, just watching. He hadn't called after Noah was found. Didn't show up to the hospital. But now suddenly he was here. "Is that him?" Daniel asked quietly during recess. Emily nodded, eyes wide. He just showed up. Daniel didn't like it. There was something off. Too many coincidences. When court resumed, the prosecutor portrayed Emily as careless and unfit. Emily sat motionless. But Daniel noticed something. The moment Baxter walked past Noah, who was seated quietly next to a social worker, the little boy tensed. His tiny hands gripped the sides of his chair. No one else seemed to notice, but Daniel did. Noah's reaction to the dog wasn't just fear, it was recognition. Daniel leaned toward Emily. "Has he ever seen that dog before?" Emily whispered. "Not until the night they found him." Daniel's gut twisted. Something wasn't adding up. This wasn't just a neglect case. It was something deeper, something hidden. And soon a 3-year-old would say 2 words that would change everything. Emily could still hear the sound of the wind that night, how it howled between the cracks in the windows like a warning. The rain had been steady since sunset, tapping against the rooftop with an eerie rhythm. She had put Noah to bed just after 8, kissed his forehead, and tucked his favorite toy truck beside him. She woke with a jolt at 1:42 a.m. Something had pulled her out of sleep, maybe a creaking door or the sound of movement. At first she thought it was just the storm, but instinct took over. She rushed straight to Noah's room. He was gone. Panic flooded her chest so fast she could barely breathe. She tore through the apartment, calling his name. The front door was still locked, the windows shut tight. But when she reached the back door, her stomach dropped. It was open, just slightly. A thin trail of rainwater shimmered on the floor inside. She didn't wait. She ran barefoot into the darkness, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Noah! Noah!" Every shadow looked like a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like a cry. She called 911 with shaking fingers, nearly dropping the phone. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain through the static of the storm. Within 15 minutes, red and blue lights flickered against the wet pavement, and patrol cars began flooding the street. The K9 unit was the last to arrive. Officer Tate brought out the dog, Baxter, a large German shepherd, well-trained and alert. He sniffed at the back door, circled a few times, then took off down the side alley. Emily tried to follow, but officers held her back. 10 minutes later, they said they found Noah, 2 blocks away, sitting beneath a street lamp near the corner gas station, wrapped in his blanket, holding his truck. She had raced to him, dropped to her knees and held him like her life depended on it. But something felt strange. His clothes were dry, his face was cold but not soaked, his socks completely clean. He was alone. She had asked, heart racing. "That's what the dog says," Tate had replied, but something in his tone, flat, rehearsed, left her unsettled. Back in the courtroom, Daniel scribbled notes on his yellow legal pad. The story Tate had just testified didn't match the physical details. A 3-year-old walking barefoot unnoticed, 2 blocks in a storm and not a drop on him? Impossible. And then there was what Noah didn't do. No tears, no words, not even a whisper of "Mommy." It was as though something had frozen inside him. Daniel turned to Emily. Was the back door broken? "It didn't latch properly," she admitted, eyes downcast. "I had told the landlord, but he hadn't fixed it yet." Had Noah ever opened it before? "No," she said. "Never." Emily then leaned closer, voice trembling. "The night before it happened, I thought I saw someone outside, in the yard." Daniel stiffened. "Did you report it?" She nodded. "They said it was probably a stray animal, but I had a feeling. I kept checking the windows that night." "Did you see who it was?" "No," she whispered. "But I think it was Jeremy." Daniel froze. The name hit like a hammer. Emily's ex. The same man who'd suddenly reappeared in town after over a year of silence. The same man now sitting in the courtroom acting like a spectator. "What makes you think that?" Daniel asked carefully. "He used to do that. When we lived together. Watch me from outside. He liked control." Daniel made a mental note. The timing was too perfect. Jeremy had come back unannounced, Noah had vanished, and now the police were eager to blame a mother, while ignoring glaring inconsistencies. Daniel stood and requested to subpoena neighborhood surveillance footage, cameras on traffic lights, nearby stores, anything. The judge approved, outside. The rain started again. Fitting, because under the surface of this tidy report something was leaking, and Daniel was going to find out what it was. Noah hadn't said a word in 6 days. Emily had tried everything, reading his favorite bedtime books, making the pancakes he loved, even playing his favorite truck cartoons on repeat. But her once bubbly little boy had retreated somewhere deep, inside himself. He wouldn't cry, wouldn't laugh, just sat with his blanket and toy truck staring at nothing. Desperate, Emily reached out to Dr. Tessa Renner, a highly respected pediatric trauma specialist known for her work with nonverbal children. Dr. Renner agreed to see Noah the next morning. In the softly lit therapy room, filled with plush animals and toys arranged in corners, Noah sat cross-legged, on a round rug while Dr. Renner observed from nearby. Emily stayed behind the one-way mirror, clutching a tissue as her son quietly moved his toy truck back and forth across the floor. For 15 minutes, Noah didn't speak. Then, something shifted. He picked up a stuffed German shepherd from the pile, stared at it, then walked it slowly across the rug toward a small plastic figure, a Lego-style man with a hat. Suddenly, he slammed the stuffed dog into the man, knocking it over. Dr. Renner took note. "Tell me about the dog, Noah," she said gently. No answer, but Noah began lining up his toys, 3 plastic people, the dog, and a single red block. He positioned the red block between the dog and one of the people, like a wall. Emily watched through the glass, tears welling in her eyes. It was like he was telling a story, but without words. After the session, Dr. Renner sat with Emily. He's processing something he witnessed or maybe experienced, but he's doing it through symbolic play, she explained. He's fixated on the dog. That may be the key. Emily blinked. Do you think something happened with the police dog? I think he's afraid of it, Dr. Renner said carefully. Whether that fear is from what the dog did or what it represents, we need to find out. That night, Emily showed Daniel a video she had taken 2 weeks before the incident. It was from the park. Noah had been giggling, running in circles. A passing officer with a K9 had walked by. Noah had run to the dog, smiling and reaching to pet it. He wasn't afraid of dogs, Emily whispered. Until now. Daniel's mind raced. If Noah had once loved dogs but now showed fear and violence through play therapy with a stuffed one, what had happened that night? Later that evening, Daniel got a call. It was from the Department of Transportation. They had finally pulled a batch of traffic camera footage from a corner 2 blocks away from Emily's home. At 1:39 a.m., a dark SUV was seen pulling out of an alley, lights off, just minutes before the 911 call. The plates weren't visible, but Daniel's gut clenched when he saw the shape of the vehicle. The slightly dented bumper, the custom roof rack, it matched the SUV that Jeremy had been driving the day he was spotted outside the courthouse. Daniel paused the footage, took a screenshot, printed it. He brought it to Emily the next morning. She didn't even need a second look. That's him, she whispered. That's Jeremy's car. Now things were starting to line up. Jeremy comes back to town, Noah goes missing. He's found clean and dry in a storm, afraid of a police dog, and now there's visual evidence tying Jeremy's vehicle to the neighborhood at the exact time of Noah's disappearance. Still, it wasn't proof. Not yet. Daniel needed one more piece, and it would come unexpectedly from the quietest voice in the courtroom. The courthouse was unusually quiet that morning. Even the usual shuffle of papers and low murmurs before session began seemed muted, as if everyone present sensed something was about to shift. Daniel sat with a thick folder in front of him, its corners worn from restless flipping. He had submitted the new video evidence to the judge under seal, requesting permission to admit it once they could verify the SUV's registration. But there was something else. Something he hadn't told Emily yet. He looked across the courtroom to where Noah sat, with his appointed child advocate, Ms. Albright. She was calm and warm like a favorite schoolteacher. And next to her, tiny and still, was Noah, his blanket wrapped tightly around him, despite the warm courtroom air. The judge called a brief recess before resuming witness testimonies. During the break, Ms. Albright approached the bench quietly. "Your Honor," she said gently, "I believe the child would like to say something. He indicated to me for the first time this morning that he remembers the dog." Emily turned sharply in her seat. Her breath hitched. Daniel looked stunned. The courtroom froze. "Proceed," the judge said softly, "but only if he feels comfortable." The bailiff gently brought Noah to the front, setting up a small booster seat beside Ms. Albright. Everyone in the room leaned in, the air tightening with anticipation. Noah looked around nervously at all the strangers, the tall walls, the judge's robes. Then he turned toward the far side of the room, toward Officer Tate and his K9 Baxter, who lay beside him silently. Noah's eyes widened. He pointed one trembling finger toward the dog, and then, barely above a whisper, he said, "Bad dog." The A. Words echoed louder than a shout. For a full 10 seconds the courtroom was completely still. Then came a ripple, a sharp intake of breath from the gallery, the sound of a pen dropping, a rustle of papers. Officer Tate's face tightened. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. The judge leaned forward. "Noah," she said gently, "can you tell us why?" Noah didn't answer. He simply turned his face away and buried it into Ms. Albright's side, trembling. But the damage was done. 2 words. 2 devastating words. Daniel stood slowly. "Your Honor, I would like to call for an immediate suspension of all accusations against my client, pending further investigation into the child's statement and newly acquired evidence. The prosecutor stood flustered. Objection. This is the testimony of a toddler, Your Honor, clearly traumatized and possibly coached, but the judge held up a hand. Enough. The child is under oath, and this isn't the only irregularity. In this case, Emily was sobbing quietly. She couldn't believe what she'd just heard, but somehow she'd always known Noah had been trying to tell her something. She just didn't know how to listen. Outside the courtroom, media had already begun circling like hawks. Word spread fast. A child had broken his silence. A police dog had been accused, not directly, not explicitly, but enough to raise doubt, enough to make people start questioning the version they'd been fed. Daniel knew what had to happen next. He needed the SUV tied to Jeremy. He needed to find out what really happened in those crucial 30 minutes, and he needed to do it before someone tried to bury the evidence, or worse, disappear, because if the boy said, "bad dog," someone was holding that leash, and Daniel was going to find out who. The day after Noah's quiet accusation, Fairview Police Department issued a public statement, brief and sterile, claiming full confidence in Officer Tate and his K-9 unit. But inside the courthouse, everything had changed. The defense's case, once considered weak, was now on fire. Daniel sat alone in his office late into the night, eyes burning from hours of research. He had pulled every disciplinary report, complaint, and incident record linked to Officer Tate. Most were clean, too clean, but one obscure internal memo caught his eye. A report filed 6 months ago by another officer after Baxter allegedly became aggressive during a house call. The report had been buried, marked "handled internally." Handled how? Daniel picked up the phone. "Hey," he said into the receiver, "I need you to check something for me. The veterinary records on K-9 Baxter. Anything unusual?" On the farther end, Laura Kessler, a retired K-9 handler turned animal welfare consultant, promised to dig. She owed Daniel a favor. After a long pause, she added, "You know dogs like Baxter don't bite unless they're commanded to, right?" "I know," Daniel replied. "That's what scares me." Meanwhile, Emily paced her living room, still shaken by Noah's two small words. Bad dog. It had taken every ounce of restraint not to scream in the courtroom. Her boy had spoken, finally. But with that came a tidal wave of fear. What exactly had the dog done? What had someone made it do? Noah lay asleep on the couch, blanket tucked under his chin, the toy truck still clutched in one hand. He looked peaceful, but Emily couldn't unsee the fear in his eyes when he had looked at Baxter. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. A low voice spoke. "Emily?" She froze. "Jeremy?" "I saw what happened in court," he said flatly. "Your lawyer's making a mess." "You shouldn't be calling me," she snapped, heart pounding. "Jeremy." They ignored her. "That kid doesn't know what he saw. He's confused. You're going to ruin people's lives with this." "I'm protecting my son," Emily said through gritted teeth. "You wouldn't understand that." "You think they're going to believe a toddler," he sneered. "Think carefully about who you're pushing." The line went dead. Emily stood there, shaken. That wasn't a concerned parent's call. That was a warning. She called Daniel immediately. "I think he knows we're close to something," she said, voice trembling. "He called me. He was threatening." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Do not answer if he calls again. I'm filing for a restraining order, and I'll talk to the judge about keeping him out of the courtroom unless he's called as a witness." He hung up and turned to his whiteboard, where he'd scrawled names, dates, timelines. He circled Jeremy's name, then underlined it. The next morning, Laura called back. "You were right to be suspicious," she said. "Baxter was treated for increased agitation 2 months ago. He was retrained with a different handler briefly, then returned to Tate." Daniel frowned. "Any note on aggression?" "Unofficially." "Yes," she replied. "He bit a suspect during a routine sweep. The report was never filed. And get this, Jeremy was a former security contractor, worked K-9s overseas. Tate used to brag about training with guys like him, could have met. A connection. Suddenly it all started to make sense. What if Jeremy had come back early? What if he'd made a deal with Tate? What if the dog hadn't just found Noah? What if it had delivered him? Daniel's hands trembled as he added it all up. Officer, trained dog, a known manipulator, a custody dispute, and a boy too young to lie, pointing a finger and saying bad dog. This wasn't just negligence anymore. It was premeditated. Daniel had been in courtrooms for over a decade, but never had a case tangled so deeply between the law and the raw truth. It was no longer just about defending Emily. It was about exposing something rotten beneath a polished badge. He walked into court that morning, holding two documents. One was the veterinary behavior report Laura had uncovered, the other, a list of previous dispatch calls involving Officer Tate and Baxter, including the incident that had been handled internally. Emily sat beside him, pale but resolute. Noah, too young to understand the legal storm around him, quietly drew trucks and stick figures in his sketchbook. "Today's the day," Daniel whispered to her. "We pull the leash." As the judge entered and court was called to order, Daniel requested permission to cross-examine Officer Tate again, this time on new grounds. The judge approved. Tate took the stand, posture stiff and smug. The badge gleamed on his chest. Daniel wasted no time. "Officer Tate, how long have you worked with your K9 partner, Baxter?" 4 years. "And in that time, has Baxter ever displayed erratic behavior?" "No, sir. He's a disciplined, loyal dog. Never had issues." Daniel nodded, then held up the behavior report. "Then how do you explain this assessment from Dr. Foley, Baxter's veterinarian, citing unpredictable aggression and need for retraining just 2 months prior to Noah's disappearance?" Tate blinked. "That was exaggerated. Routine. Assessment. He was stressed from working long shifts." "Is it also routine," Daniel continued, "for a dog to be reassigned to a different handler for a month?" Silence. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Daniel pressed. "And why wasn't any of this included in your official testimony or the incident report?" Tate's jaw tensed. "It wasn't relevant to the case." "It is, if a child accuses your dog of attacking him," Daniel shot back, "especially if you knew your K9 was unstable. But perhaps that instability wasn't the issue. Perhaps Baxter didn't act on his own." Tate's brows furrowed. "Do you know a man named Jeremy Coyle?" Daniel asked sharply. A flicker of surprise crossed Tate's face, but it was fast, buried under practice control. No, you never trained with him. Never attended private K9 seminars with him when he returned from his security contract work?" Tate hesitated. Daniel held up a grainy photo. Jeremy and Tate side by side, both in training gear, both holding leashes. The courtroom gasped. "This photo was taken at an off-the-books training session 2 years ago," Daniel said, voice sharp. "Where Jeremy was hired as a guest instructor. Want to try that answer again, officer?" Tate shifted in his seat. "I didn't think it was relevant." "Relevant," Daniel echoed. "You personally knew the man who had motive to kidnap Noah. You had a dog recently flagged for behavioral problems, and somehow you were the officer who responded that night. You found the child miraculously unharmed, dry in a storm, without even mud on his socks, and chalked it up to coincidence?" Tate said nothing. Daniel turned to the judge. "I submit to the court that Officer Tate, under the influence or direction of Mr. Jeremy Coyle, used his K9 to retrieve the child in what may have been a staged rescue to cover up an unlawful abduction." Gasps rang out across the room. Emily's upraised hand flew to her mouth. For the first time since the trial began, Jeremy, seated silently in the back, stood up and walked out of the courtroom without a word. The judge banged her gavel. "Order. This court will recess for 20 minutes before I rule on this motion." As the room slowly emptied, Daniel turned to Emily. "We've cracked it," he whispered. But even as relief washed over her, she knew it wasn't over. Jeremy was out there, and men like him didn't disappear quietly. Outside the courthouse, the press swarm was relentless. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the buzz of the scandal spread like wildfire. Jeremy Coyle had vanished, his presence erased in a blink, but the trail he left behind was Smoking hot. Daniel and Emily barely had a moment to breathe before their phones began ringing non-stop. Friends, family, even strangers offered support and threats. Emily felt the weight of it all crushing her chest. Noah was her world, and now that the courtroom had exposed a web of lies, she feared Jeremy might strike again. "Daniel, what if he tries to take Noah again?" she whispered late that night, wrapping a blanket around her trembling shoulders. "We won't let that happen," Daniel promised. "I'm already working with the police on a protective order. Plus, I've asked Laura to check with her contacts for any sign Jeremy might be moving." The following morning, Daniel's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Laura. "Got a lead. Jeremy's been spotted 2 towns over, in a rundown motel, moving fast. He's watching his back." Emily's stomach twisted. "What do we do?" Daniel's face hardened. "We find him first." Meanwhile, in the shadows of a dusty motel room, Jeremy sat alone, his jaw clenched. His eyes flicked over the worn map spread on the cracked table. He wasn't ready to surrender. "Not now. I didn't get caught because of luck," he muttered. To himself. Because of a kid's words. He stared at the grainy surveillance photo Daniel had leaked to the press, featuring the SUV and the recognizable badge of Officer Tate. "No," he hissed. "Because I was careful. Because I controlled the dog." He paced, fingers tightening into fists. They don't know the whole story. Behind his cold exterior was a man terrified of losing control, the grip on his power, his secrets, his freedom. And above all, the secret that Noah knew something he should never have seen. Back at Emily's house, Noah was sleeping peacefully, his breathing even. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope warmed Emily's heart. But Daniel wasn't celebrating. "We need to prepare for the worst," he said, pacing the living room. "Jeremy's desperate. That means dangerous." Emily nodded, glancing at the small toy truck on the table, the same one Noah had clutched when he said those 2 words, "Bad dog." "They're connected," she whispered. "Yes," Daniel agreed. "And it's time to end this." Daniel coordinated with local law enforcement and Laura's contacts to arrange a covert operation. They had Jeremy's last known location and the vehicle's license plate. But no one knew what he might do next. The night before the planned raid, Emily sat beside Noah's bed, brushing his hair gently. "Mommy's here," she whispered. "You're safe now." Noah opened his eyes slowly and smiled faintly, a fragile beam of light piercing through the darkness. Emily felt tears she couldn't hold back fall. "Tomorrow, we find the truth," she promised. The dawn broke cold and grey. Daniel, police officers, and Laura approached the motel cautiously. The air was thick with tension. Jeremy was inside, waiting. The moment had come. The door crashed open. "Police!" a voice shouted. Jeremy bolted, sprinting toward the back alley. The chase was on. Heart pounding, Daniel followed, adrenaline surging. Jeremy stumbled, glanced back, and vanished behind a stack of crates. Daniel heard the barking of a dog. Suddenly, Baxter, the very K9 from the trial, burst into the alley, eyes locked on Jeremy. Jeremy hesitated, then lunged forward, but Baxter was faster. The dog tackled Jeremy to the ground, growling fiercely. Daniel rushed forward as officers cuffed Jeremy. It was over, but the silence that followed was heavy. Noah's words echoed still. Bad dog. Had the dog been a weapon or a savior? The answers were still coming. Jeremy's arrest dominated headlines the next morning. K9 handler behind alleged kidnapping. Plot nabbed in raid, read one. Another simply said, "Boy's 2 words lead to justice." But inside the courtroom, justice was more than headlines. It was slow, methodical, and painfully human. Emily sat beside Daniel at the defense table, her hands trembling. It had been 2 days since Jeremy was taken into custody, and today's session was to confirm the dismissal of all charges against her. But her mind wasn't on her freedom, it was on the truth, and on her son. Noah sat quietly with Ms. Albright, toy truck in hand, drawing again. But something had changed. His shoulders weren't so tight, his eyes didn't dart around the room, like they used to. He even hummed softly as he colored. Healing had begun. Judge Morrison entered and immediately addressed the room. In light of new evidence, The state has formally dropped all charges against Emily Hayes. This court recognizes the significant failures in procedure and investigation that led to this moment. Emily gasped, tears welling in her eyes as she gripped Daniel's hand tightly. But, the judge added, her voice firm, this court is not done. We must understand how this happened and ensure it doesn't happen again. Officer Tate, stripped of his badge and seated with a defense attorney of his own, avoided everyone's eyes. The court called Laura Kessler to the stand. She spoke calmly. The dog Baxter is not to blame. He was following commands, learned ones. Someone, likely Jeremy, used his prior canine training to control the animal during the event. The incident with Noah wasn't a random act. It was orchestrated. Gasps again filled the courtroom. Baxter was placed in a situation he didn't understand. He's been transferred to a rehabilitation facility, and we're hopeful he can be safely reassigned. Emily leaned into Daniel. So it's true. The dog didn't act alone. No, Daniel said. But it also wasn't the dog's fault. Later, that afternoon, Jeremy was formally arraigned. He showed no remorse, just a cold, empty stare. But his case was strong enough now for the district attorney to charge him with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and attempted parental abduction. Justice was beginning to unfold. 2 weeks passed. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Emily had custody of Noah restored permanently, and Daniel became more than just a lawyer to her. He became a friend, a pillar. One sunny afternoon, Emily and Noah visited the playground for the first time in months. Noah ran freely, laughing, chasing bubbles with other children. For the first time, Emily saw his full smile, wide, joyful, unburdened. As they sat on the bench watching, Miss Albright joined Emily. He's made incredible progress, she said warmly, and I think he's ready to talk more. Emily nodded, her heart full. I'll never forget the moment he pointed to that dog. Just 2 words, and everything changed. Miss Albright smiled. Sometimes it only takes a few words to start the truth unraveling. That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, he looked up at her. Mommy? He whispered. Yes, sweetie. Can we get a good dog someday? Emily blinked, surprised. You want a dog? He nodded. Not like the bad one. A happy one. One that doesn't yell. Emily's heart broke and healed all at once. She kissed his forehead. Yes. Someday, we'll get a happy dog. And for the first time in a long while, she meant every word. Epilogue. A year later, Noah stood in a small yard beside a golden retriever puppy, laughing as the dog licked his face. Emily watched from the porch, Daniel at her side, coffee in hand. It's strange, she murmured, how one moment can change everything. Daniel nodded. Or one sentence. Noah turned suddenly and shouted, Come here, Lucky! The dog barked happily and ran toward him. This time, it wasn't silence that followed, it was laughter. And that finally was the sound of healing,